Welcome to How to Reduce Cost and Risk of Paying Bills, brought to you by the Controllers Council. My name is Neil Brown, Executive Director of the Controllers Council. And before I introduce our expert panelists and our partner sponsor, let me share some brief housekeeping items. We'll have Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please use your GoToWebinar control panel to ask our experts questions. Next, this webinar is CPE eligible. So we'll have 4 polling questions. Again, use your GoToWebinar control panel to answer polls. And even if you're not interested in CPE, it's interesting to benchmark your peers. Please allow 1 week for CPE certificates. Also regarding CPE, you'll receive a brief survey directly after the webcast, so please complete. And finally, you'll receive a link to this webcast via email in the next 24 hours. So no need for notes or screenshots. So with that, I'd like to say a word about our partner and sponsor, BILL, the leader in financial automation software for small and mid-sized businesses. Learn more at www.bill.com. So I'm pleased to introduce our expert panelists. Ken Fick is President and CEO of FP&A Experts. They provide FP&A services, of course, and related services. Ken has more than 20 years experience in both corporate finance and consulting. Joe Flesher is Webinar Content Marketing Manager for BILL, and he has more than 16 years experience, including CFO.com and Argyle. So with that, I will turn it over to Joe.
Well, thank you so much, Neil. And as Neil mentioned, I'm Joe Fleischer with BILL. I look forward to our conversation with Ken Fick. And before we launch into our discussion, I do want to outline what we're going to plan to cover during our discussion. During our conversation, we will discuss the different stages of an accounts payable process, as well as how to evaluate each stage of your company's payables process or payable process. We're also going to talk about how to identify which stages of managing payables lend themselves best to automation, what goals finance leaders should establish before introducing automation in accounts payable, and how to use automation to mitigate risks and, as the title indicates, lower the cost of managing payables. So the first question I want to pose to you, Ken, is, in your experience, what costs of managing payables, or mid-sized companies in particular, most likely to overlook as their volumes of payables increase?
Oh, thank you for having me on, Joe. I think overlooked costs primarily fall into one of 5 or multiple 5 buckets. The first and very most important one is time and labor costs. Managing payables can be a time-consuming process and requires a dedicated staff. And many times these costs are masked by what I call superhero finance people. So these could be accounts payable people or a supervisor or whatever that just get the job done. And that could be, overtime that is either booked or not booked, and just frustration in regards to pushing it through. But the senior leadership probably doesn't notice it because it's still getting done. So I think time and labor costs is the first component that is typically overlooked. They're not taking into those costs. The second would be payment processing fees. They can add up quickly, especially if the company is using multiple payment methods as their volume increases. These include fees like transaction fees, wire transfer fees, and foreign currency exchange fees. So they can be kind of hidden fees or overlooked by companies as well too. Late payment fees. So failing to pay invoices on time can result in a late payment fee, as we know. And that can really hurt the company's credit rating over the long term, and obviously it does have a cost to it. But in order, as we learned through COVID, supply chain is such an important part of our businesses. You don't want to you want to do things that would alleviate any type of supply chain risk. And late payment fees would, make you appear as a poor partner to a vendor. So that's something that is kind of overlooked. Invoice errors and disputes. Errors and disputes in invoices can lead to delay in payments, and then you have the whole late fee payment issue. It also leads to potentially additional labor costs, and again, damaged relationships. And there will always be invoice errors and disputes. I mean, that's I delivered 12 muffins. No, I only got 10. I mean, that is going to happen. It's how effectively those disputes or those changes are managed and in the process of going through it. And finally, the biggest one I think that is overlooked is fraudulent activity. So as the volume of payables increases, the risk of fraudulent activity such as fake or double invoices or phishing scam also increase. So it doesn't mean that your controls go away. That's not what I'm saying. So let's say you have $500,000 in payables per year, just making up a number, and you have the risk of 0.001% of potential fraud going on in there. Well, take that and multiply that times 10 million. All of a sudden, that insignificant number that isn't worth anything starts to make a difference, right? And that could be a pretty big number. And the risk of that is becoming bigger as well too. So that's something I think is overlooked. So I'd say these 5 key areas are the areas I've seen most overlooked in regards to cost of managing payables as the volume increases. Joe?
Well, thank you so much, Ken. And I think that you've really outlined significant costs that can certainly multiply, and that organizations, especially mid-sized organizations, are likely to overlook in connection with accounts payable. What we'd now like to do is pose the first of 4 polling questions. I'll turn it over to Neil.
All right, let's launch this poll. As before, attendees, please use the GoToWebinar control panel for answering the poll for CPE credit or to benchmark your peers. Give you a few seconds. And we have 4 polls, so if you're going for CPE, try and answer at least 3 of the 4. We're getting close. All right, so let's take a look at the results here. My company, as the number of invoices increases, so too does the average cost to process each invoice. Agree by 39%, followed by disagree for 34%. And Joe, Ken, any comments on this?
So I think that, it's interesting that we have such significant agreement. Ken, what are your observations?
This clearly makes sense. I mean, especially in the small to mid-size enterprise. As volume increases, things get overlooked. Volume does that, and you're actually paying, I've seen a lot more wire transfers as opposed to ACHs as volume increases. And there's also a typical delay by management to hire additional resources because of uncertainty how quickly or if that revenue is going to be maintained, especially in smaller enterprises. That's a big concern. So it wouldn't surprise me if this is the case, absent any type of automation process.